Han was having the worst day of his life, and that was saying something for a cargo pilot who'd been shot at more times than he could count. His beat-up transport ship groaned through space, loaded with medical supplies bound for the outer colonies. The pay was decent. The route was supposed to be safe, and Han figured he'd be sipping cheap coffee on New Busan by tomorrow morning. Then the sky exploded around him. Two massive alien fleets materialized out of nowhere, their ships bristling, with weapons that made Han's little transport look like a toy. Energy beams crackled between the vessels, lighting up the darkness with colors that hurt to look at. Han had seen alien battles before, but never this close, never this intense. The scanner was going crazy, screaming warnings about radiation and debris. Come on, Han muttered, yanking the controls hard to the left as a chunk of burning metal the size of a building tumbled past his cockpit. His hands were sweating inside his gloves. One stray shot from those warships would turn his cargo hauler into space dust. The battle raged around him for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Han ducked and weaved through the chaos, praying to whatever gods might be listening, that he'd make it out alive. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the fleets vanished. Both sides jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind nothing but wreckage and the fading glow of weapon discharges. Han was just starting to breathe again when something slammed into his cargo hold. The impact threw him against his harness hard enough to leave bruises. Warning lights flashed red across his control panel. Hull breach in Bay 2. Atmospheric pressure dropping. His ship's computer started listing damage in its annoying mechanical voice, but Han was already unbuckling himself and grabbing his emergency kit. He found the intruder wedged between two containers of bandages and antibiotics. It was a small fighter craft, sleek and organic-looking, like it had been grown rather than built. The hull was cracked open like an egg, sparks flying from damaged systems. Through the breach, Han could see movement inside. What he pulled out made his blood run cold and his heart race at the same time. She was huge, maybe 7 feet tall, with 4 arms and skin that looked like it was made of living metal. Glowing. Scars covered her body in patterns that seemed to shift and pulse with her breathing. She was clearly a warrior, built for fighting, but now she was dying. Green blood seeped from wounds that no human could survive. In her lower arms, she clutched something small and precious. A baby. The infant was unlike anything Han had ever seen. It had the warrior's metallic skin, but softer, more human-like. Its eyes were large and dark, watching Han with an intelligence that seemed impossible for something so young. This wasn't just an alien child. This was something new, something that belonged to 2 worlds at once. The warrior woman's breathing was getting weaker. She looked up at Han with eyes that held desperation and hope in equal measure. When she spoke, her voice was like grinding gears, but somehow Han understood every word. "The hunters come for him," she gasped, her glowing scars flickering like dying stars. "He carries the old memory. Take him where they cannot follow." She pressed the child into Han's arms. The baby was warm and surprisingly light, making soft sounds that weren't quite crying. Han stared down at the little face, feeling something shift inside his chest. This wasn't his child, wasn't even his species, but every instinct he had was screaming at him to protect it. "To your chaotic human world," the warrior whispered. "They cannot understand chaos." Then she was gone, her scars fading to black as her ship's systems finally died. Han stood there in his damaged cargo hold, holding an alien baby whose eyes seemed to hold secrets older than stars. 3 days after finding the baby, Han was starting to think he might actually be losing his mind. The kid needed a name, and somehow Min just felt right when he looked at those dark, knowing eyes. Maybe it was because the little guy was so small, or maybe Han's brain was just fried from stress. Either way, Min it was. The baby should have been impossible to care for. Han knew nothing about raising human children, let alone alien ones, but Min seemed to understand everything. When Han felt frustrated trying to figure out what the kid needed, Min would make different sounds. Soft coos when he was hungry, tiny chirps when he needed cleaning. It was like the baby could read Han's emotions and was trying to help him figure things out. "You're a smart little guy, aren't you?" Han found himself talking to Min while checking the navigation charts. Way too smart for your own good. Min would watch him with those big eyes, and Han swore the kid understood every word. Sometimes when Han felt lonely during the long stretches between star systems, Min would reach out with tiny hands and make content little sounds, like he was trying to comfort a worried parent. But they weren't alone out there. Han first noticed the ships on day 4. Sleek, dark vessels that didn't match any design in his databases. They stayed just at the edge of his scanner range, never getting close enough for a clear reading but never falling behind either. When he changed course, they changed course. When he stopped at a fuel station, they waited at the system's edge. "We've got company, Min," Han muttered, watching the mysterious blips on his screen. The baby made a worried sound, like he understood the danger. Han tried everything he could think of. He filed false flight plans, took random detours through crowded shipping lanes, even hid in the shadow of a gas giant for 6 hours. Nothing worked. The ship stayed with them like hungry wolves, following a wounded deer. By the second week, Han was exhausted and paranoid. He'd started talking to Min constantly, partly to stay sane and partly because the kid seemed to calm down when he heard Han's voice. The baby was growing fast, too fast. Already he seemed bigger, more aware. Sometimes Han caught him staring at the stars through the cockpit window, like he was remembering something important. The end came near the Kepler asteroid belt. Han thought he could lose his followers in the maze of floating rocks, but instead he flew right into their trap. 5 ships materialized around him, their hulls black as space itself. They were nothing like the elegant fighter that had crashed into his cargo hold. These vessels looked hungry, built for hunting. "Well, Min, looks like we're out of running room," Han said, his hands shaking as he reached for the distress beacon. But before he could activate it, the baby started crying. It wasn't normal crying. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, filling the ship with a vibration that Han felt in his bones. Min's metallic skin began to glow, just like his mother's scars had. The crying got louder, more intense, until it wasn't sound anymore but something else entirely. Then Han's instruments went crazy. Every system on his ship flickered and sparked. The lights dimmed, the artificial gravity hiccuped, and his navigation computer started displaying error messages in languages he'd never seen. But outside, something much worse was happening to the hunter ships. One by one, their lights went out. Han watched through his cockpit window as the sleek predator vessels went dark and began drifting. No engines, no weapons, no life support. Whatever Min had done, it had fried every piece of technology within 100 kilometers. The baby stopped crying and looked up at Han with those impossibly wise eyes. For the first time since finding him, Han felt truly afraid. Not of the hunters, or the danger they were in, but of what he was carrying. This wasn't just some refugee child caught in a war between aliens. This was something new, something powerful, something the galaxy had never seen before. And somehow, Han was responsible for keeping it safe. Han had never been so happy to see the rusty docking arms of Haven Station. The frontier trading post looked like it had been built from spare parts and held together with hope, but after 2 weeks of running from ghost ships, it felt like paradise. More importantly, it had a medical bay and someone who might have answers about Min. The baby had been changing during their journey. He was growing faster than any human child should, and sometimes Han caught him staring at nothing with those dark eyes like he was seeing things that weren't there. The glowing episodes were getting stronger too. Just yesterday, Min had accidentally shorted out Han's coffee maker just by getting excited about food. "Let's find out what you really are." "Little guy," Han whispered, as they walked through the station's cramped corridors. Min rode in a makeshift carrier on Han's chest, wide eyes taking in everything around them. Haven Station was exactly the kind of place Han needed. No questions asked, no official records, and plenty of people who minded their own business. The kind of place where a man carrying a strange baby wouldn't attract much attention, but finding the right person to help wasn't easy. Han spent 3 hours asking around before someone pointed him toward Dr. Lee's clinic. The woman who answered his knock looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her lab coat was stained with things Han didn't want to think about, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. "I don't treat humans," she said, before Han could even speak. especially not ones carrying babies that make my equipment go haywire just by being in the same room. How did you know about that? Han asked, surprised. Dr. Lee sighed and stepped aside to let them in. Because half the station's electronics went crazy when you docked. That's not normal, even for frontier space. What exactly are you carrying? The clinic was small but clean, filled with scanning equipment that looked more advanced than anything Han had seen on the Outer Rim. Dr. Lee was clearly good at what she did, even if she wasn't much for small talk. She gestured for Han to put Min on the examination table. His mother was dying, Han explained while Dr. Lee set up her scanners. She said something about hunters coming for him, and something called the old memory. I thought maybe you could tell me what that means. Dr. Lee's face went pale. Did you say hunters, as in someone's hunting this child? Yeah, they've been following us for weeks. Why? Do you know what they are? The doctor was quiet for a long moment, running her scanners. Over Min. The baby seemed to enjoy the attention, making happy little sounds and reaching for the glowing displays. But Dr. Lee's expression was getting more worried by the second. The species you're describing sounds like the Vex, she said finally. They're not like other aliens. They don't just fight wars or take territory. They consume other species entirely. Genetic absorption, we call it. They take DNA from other races and add it to their own, making themselves stronger and more adaptable. Han felt his stomach drop. Consume? You mean they eat people? Worse than that. They don't just kill civilizations. They erase them completely. Every trace of culture, language, biology, everything gets absorbed into the Vex collective. It's like the species never existed at all. Dr. Lee's scanner beeped, and she stared at the results with wide eyes. Oh my God! What is it? This child's DNA, it's impossible. I'm reading genetic sequences from dozens of different species. Some of them I recognize from historical records, but others... She looked up at Han with fear in her eyes. Others are from civilizations that have been extinct for thousands of years. Han looked down at Min, who was playing with his own tiny fingers and making content baby sounds. I don't understand. How is that possible? The old memory, Dr. Lee whispered. It's not just knowledge stored in his brain, it's a living genetic library. Every species the Vex have ever destroyed, their DNA is somehow preserved in this child's cells. He's not just a hybrid, he's a walking resurrection protocol for entire extinct civilizations. The implications hit Han like a physical blow. That's why they're hunting him. If the Vex could capture him and absorb his genetic material, they'd become unstoppable. But if he survives and grows up... Dr. Lee looked at the baby with something like awe. He could potentially bring back every species they've ever destroyed. He's not just a child, Han. He's hope for half the galaxy. Min chose that moment to look up at both of them and smile, showing tiny teeth that gleamed like metal. Han reached down and picked him up, feeling the weight of an entire galaxy's future in his arms. The alarms started screaming at 3 in the E. Morning station time. Han jolted awake in the tiny guest quarters Dr. Lee had found for them, immediately reaching for Min. The baby was already awake, his metallic skin flickering with worried light patterns that had become all too familiar. What's happening? Han asked, but Dr. Lee was already at the window, her face grim. They found us, she said simply. The Vex are here. Through the thick viewport, Han could see them emerging from hyperspace. The ships looked like living nightmares. Black hulls that seemed to absorb light, covered in organic-looking growths that pulsed with sickly green energy. There were dozens of them, surrounding Haven Station like a pack of predators circling wounded prey. We need to go now, Dr. Lee said, grabbing her medical kit and a portable scanner. The station's defenses won't hold them for 5 minutes. Han scooped up Min and their few belongings. The baby was making distressed sounds, not quite crying but clearly sensing the danger around them. As they ran through the station's corridors, Han could hear the sounds of battle beginning outside. Energy weapons lit up the darkness, as Haven's security forces tried desperately to buy time for evacuations. They made it to Han's ship, just as the first Vex boarding pods began punching through the station's hull. Dr. Lee strapped herself into the co-pilot seat while Han fired up the engines, Min secured in his carrier between them. The launch was rough and fast, with pieces of debris bouncing off their hull as they cleared the docking bay. "Where do we go?" Han asked, pushing his little cargo hauler as hard as it would go. Behind them, Haven Station was already dying. The Vex ships were tearing it apart piece by piece, methodically destroying everything and everyone inside. "I don't know," Dr. Lee admitted, her voice shaking. "The Vex have quantum tracking technology, so as long as they have Min's genetic signature, they can follow us anywhere in known space." Han felt his heart sink. "So we can't outrun them?" "We can try, but—" Dr. Lee looked at her scanner readings. "They're not just hunting randomly anymore. Every Vex ship in this sector is converging on our position. They know exactly what Min represents." Over the next 6 hours, they jumped from system to system, but the Vex were always there. Sometimes it took them minutes to catch up, sometimes hours, but they never stopped coming. Han's ship wasn't built for this kind of running battle. His engines were overheating, his fuel reserves dropping fast. "Why don't they just attack us directly?" Han asked during a brief stop in an asteroid field. "They've got enough ships to blow us apart 100 times over." Dr. Lee was running scans on Min, who had fallen asleep despite all the chaos. "Because they need him alive. Dead, he's just another body. Alive, he's the key to genetic patterns they've been trying to unlock for centuries. They want to absorb him slowly, carefully, to make sure they get every piece of information his DNA contains." The thought made Han sick. He looked down at Min's peaceful face and felt something fierce and protective rise up in his chest. "That's not happening, not while I'm breathing." "Han, you need to understand something," Dr. Lee said quietly. "This isn't just about one child anymore. If the Vex capture Min and successfully absorb his genetic library, they'll become powerful enough to consume the entire galaxy, every living species, including humanity. And if we can keep him safe, if he survives and grows up, if his abilities fully develop," Dr. Lee smiled sadly, "he could bring back civilizations that have been dead for thousands of years. The Vex have erased entire species from existence, but Min carries their genetic memory. He's not just a child. And he's the galaxy's second chance." Another alarm started beeping. More Vex ships were entering the system, their dark hulls sliding through space like hungry sharks. Han started the engines again, his hands steady despite the hopelessness of their situation. "We can't keep running forever," he said. "No, we can't." Dr. Lee was checking her communications equipment. "We need help, real help, the kind of allies who would be willing to fight for someone else's child, even if it means facing the most dangerous predators in the galaxy." Han thought about that as they jumped to hyperspace once again, Min sleeping peacefully between them. Who would be crazy enough to stand against the Vex? Who would risk everything for a baby they'd never met? Then it hit him. There was one species in the galaxy known for doing exactly that kind of stupid, heroic thing. One species that had a reputation for adopting strays and fighting hopeless battles just because it was the right thing to do. "I know where we need to go," Han said, setting course for human space. "We're going home." Han's hands were shaking as he prepared the broadcast. They were hiding in the shadow of a dead moon at the edge of human space, buying precious time while Dr. Lee worked on extending their ship's communication range. Min was fussing in his carrier, picking up on Han's nervous energy like he always did. "You sure about this?" Dr. Lee asked, making final adjustments to the transmitter. "Once you send this message, there's no taking it back. Every human colony in 3 sectors is going to know about Min." Han looked down at the baby, who was watching him with those impossibly wise eyes. Over the past weeks, Min had grown even more. He was starting to make sounds that almost resembled words, and sometimes Han swore the kid was trying to tell him something important. "What choice do we have?" Han said. "The Vex are going to catch us eventually. Maybe if people know what's really at stake, someone will be willing to help." He activated the emergency broadcast system and took a deep breath. This message would go out on every human frequency, from military channels to civilian emergency networks. Every colony, every ship, every listening post would hear it. "This is Cargo Pilot Han calling all human forces," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm carrying a child who's being hunted by something called the Vex. This isn't just any kid. He's got the genetic memories of dozens of extinct alien species inside him. The Vex destroyed those civilizations, but somehow this baby carries their DNA. If they catch him, they'll become unstoppable. If we can protect him, Han paused, looking at Min again, he might be able to bring back entire species that have been dead for thousands of years. The silence after he finished the broadcast felt eternal. Han half expected nothing to happen, or maybe a few polite responses telling him he was crazy. What he got instead changed everything he thought he knew about humanity. The first response came from New Sol Colony within an hour. Captain Park's voice crackled through the speakers, clear and determined. "This is New Sol Defense Force to cargo pilot Han. We're mobilizing our fleet to provide escort. Send us your coordinates." "Captain, you don't understand," Han replied quickly. "The Vex will destroy anyone who helps us. This isn't a rescue mission. It's a suicide run." There was a pause. Then Captain Park's voice came back, and Han could hear the smile in it. "Han, we've got kids here too. Human kids, alien kids, doesn't matter. Nobody hurts children on our watch. Send those coordinates." Before Han could respond, more voices started flooding the communication channels. Commander Kim from the Taiyang mining station was organizing civilian evacuations, preparing to house refugees when the Vex inevitably retaliated. Colony Administrator Yoon from the agricultural world of Hanbit was volunteering her planet as a temporary safe haven. "Are you people insane?" Dr. Lee whispered, listening to the growing chorus of volunteers. "They're offering to fight the most dangerous predators in the galaxy for a child they've never even seen." But Han was starting to understand something. That amazed him. More colonies were joining in by the hour. Military commanders were scrambling defense fleets. Civilian captains were offering their ships for evacuation runs. Even individual families were opening their homes to refugees who would be displaced when the Vex came hunting. The most shocking response came from Director Choi of the Frontier, world called Hope's End. Her colony was barely established, just a few thousand people trying to build something in the middle of nowhere. She had maybe a dozen security officers and some civilian mining equipment. But her message was clear. "Cargo pilot Han, this is Hope's End colony. We know what it's like to be hunted, and we know what it's like to need help when nobody else cares. Bring that baby here, we'll protect him." "Director, your colony can't possibly stand against a Vex fleet," Han protested. "Maybe not," she replied, "but we can make them work for it. And while we're buying time, maybe someone smarter than us will figure out a permanent solution." Dr. Lee was staring at the communication display in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this. Entire worlds are volunteering to be destroyed for one alien child. This goes against every survival instinct any species should have." Han felt something warm spreading through his chest as he listened to more and more humans offering their help. These weren't soldiers following orders or politicians making calculations. These were ordinary people, farmers, miners, shopkeepers, parents, who heard about a baby in danger and decided they couldn't live with themselves if they didn't try to help. "That's what makes us human," Han said softly, adjusting Min's blanket. The baby had fallen asleep, listening to all the voices promising to protect him. "We're not the strongest species in the galaxy, or the smartest, or the most advanced. But when someone needs help, especially a kid who can't help himself, we show up." Captain Park's voice came through again. "Han, we've got 36 ships converging on your position. It's not much against a Vex fleet, but it's what we've got. Are you ready to make a run for Hope's End?" Han looked at Dr. Lee, who just shrugged and smiled. "Well, we wanted allies willing to fight for someone else's child. Looks like we found them." As Han powered up his engines and prepared to rendezvous with the human fleet, he felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Maybe they were all crazy. Maybe this would end in disaster. But for the first time since finding Min, Han knew they weren't alone. The first colony to fall was Hanbit, the agricultural world that had volunteered to be their safe haven. Han watched from orbit as the Vex ships descended like black rain, their hulls opening to release swarms of hunter-killers. The colonists had 3 hours to evacuate before the planet's surface turned to glass. But something impossible happened during those 3 hours. "Han, are you seeing this?" Dr. Lee's voice was tight with disbelief as she watched the tactical displays. Below them, Farmers who had never held anything more dangerous than a plasma cutter were coordinating defensive positions like seasoned military veterans. Old Man Shin, who ran the grain storage facility, was somehow directing artillery fire with precision that would have impressed a trained gunner. The colony's doctor, a quiet woman named Dr. Kang, had organized medical triage points using tactical knowledge she couldn't possibly have learned in medical school. "How are they doing that?" Han whispered, holding Min close to the viewport. The baby was wide awake, his metallic skin glowing softly as he watched the battle below. Those dark eyes seemed to be tracking every movement, every explosion, like he was conducting some kind of invisible orchestra. The evacuation was successful, but barely. As the last transport lifted off, the Vex began their systematic destruction of everything humans had built on Hanbeat. Han's small fleet jumped to hyperspace just as the planet's atmosphere started burning. "Next stop, Taeyang Mining Station," Captain Park announced over the comm. "Commander Kim says they're ready for us." They lasted 4 days at Taeyang. The mining station was built inside a massive asteroid with tunnels and chambers carved deep into the rock. It should have been impossible to defend against a full Vex assault, but the miners fought like they'd been planning for this battle their entire lives. Han watched in amazement as Engineer Zhang, a soft-spoken man who fixed air recyclers for a living, somehow knew exactly how to modify the station's industrial equipment into devastating weapons. The miners moved through their tunnels with tactical precision that belonged in military textbooks, not civilian operations. "It's happening again," Dr. Lee said, running continuous scans on Min. "The same phenomenon we saw at Hanbit. These people are displaying combat knowledge they've never learned." Min was changing too. Each battle seemed to make him grow faster, his abilities stronger. Sometimes Han caught him making soft sounds that almost resembled speech, but in languages that didn't exist anymore. The baby's skin patterns were getting more complex, swirling with colors that reminded Han of the aurora displays he'd seen on Earth. They held Taeyang for 4 days before the Vex finally broke through. The evacuation was another miracle of coordination, with civilian miners executing complex military maneuvers like they'd practiced them for years. As they jumped away from the dying station, Han realized something incredible was happening. "Dr. Lee, run those scans again," he said, watching Min sleep peacefully despite the chaos around them. "I think our little guy is doing something to help these people." The results were impossible to believe. Han, the humans exposed to Min's presence are showing genetic activation in dormant DNA sequences, sequences that match some of the extinct species patterns in Min's own genetic code. "You mean he's, what, teaching them?" "More than that. He's awakening genetic memories that humans shouldn't have. Combat knowledge, tactical thinking, technical skills. It's like the extinct civilizations in Min's DNA are somehow reaching through him to help their defenders." Colony after colony fell, but each one bought precious time and saved precious lives. New Jeju held for 2 days, their fishing fleet transformed into a deadly naval force that fought the Vex in the planet's vast oceans. The people there fought, with knowledge of aquatic warfare that belonged to a species that had been extinct for millennia. Hope's Landing lasted almost a week. The colonists there were artists and writers, but they defended their world with strategic brilliance that amazed even the Vex. Director Choi led them with tactical genius that seemed to come from nowhere, organizing ambushes and counterattacks with the skill of a master general. He's not just carrying their genetic memories, Dr. Lee realized during their escape from Hope's Landing. He's sharing them. Every human who gets close to Min is temporarily accessing the combat experience. Of dozens of extinct warrior species, Han looked down at the sleeping baby in his arms. Min's peaceful face gave no hint of the incredible power he carried, or the way he was somehow giving humanity the tools to fight back against impossible odds. "The colonies are buying us time." Captain Park's voice came over the comm, "but we can't keep this up forever. The Vex are learning from each battle, adapting their tactics. We need a permanent solution." "Where to next?" Han asked, though he already knew the answer. There was only one place left to go, one colony that had volunteered to be their final stand. "Hope's End," Dr. Lee said quietly. "The last colony willing to take us in." As they jumped toward their final destination, Han wondered if Min understood what was happening. The baby's eyes opened and looked directly at him, and for a moment Han saw something ancient and wise looking back, something that had watched civilizations rise and fall, that carried the hopes and dreams of entire extinct species, something that was finally ready to fight back. Mining Station Tai Sung looked like the last place anyone would choose to make a final stand. The facility was old, built into a dead asteroid that had been hollowed out decades ago by miners looking for rare metals. The corridors were narrow, the equipment was outdated, and the whole place smelled like machine oil and recycled air. Han clutched Min tighter as they docked, expecting the worst. This was it, the end of the line. No more colonies willing to take them in, no more fleets offering protection, just a worn-out mining station with maybe 200 workers who probably wished they'd never heard his emergency broadcast. Station Chief Bayek met them at the airlock. She was a small, tough-looking woman with calloused hands and grease stains on her coveralls. Her eyes were hard, the kind that came from years of making difficult decisions in a place where one mistake could kill everyone. "So you're the one causing all this trouble," she said, looking Han up and down. Then her gaze fell on Min and her expression softened slightly. "And this is the baby everyone's dying for." "Chief Bayek, I want you to know we understand if you can't help us," Han said quickly. "The Vex will be here soon, and when they come, they won't leave anyone alive. If you want us to leave, we'll go." The station chief was quiet for a long moment, studying Min's peaceful face. The baby was awake and alert, those dark eyes taking in everything around him. Dr. Lee stepped forward with her scanner, but Beck waved her away. "I've got 3 grandchildren back on Earth," she said finally. "Never met them in person, but I send them birthday presents every year. Got their pictures in my office." She looked up at Han. "You think I'm going to hand over someone else's baby to monsters? You think any of us are?" Han felt his throat tighten. "Chief, you don't understand what you're up against. The Vex don't just kill people, they erase entire civilizations." "Then I guess we'd better make sure they don't get the chance," Beck said. She activated her comm unit. "All hands, this is the chief. Battle stations, seal the blast doors and power up everything we've got. We've got visitors coming who aren't welcome here." The response was immediate. Throughout the station, miners and technicians began moving with purpose. Han expected to see fear, maybe panic, but instead he saw determination. These people knew they were probably going to die, but they were preparing to fight anyway. "Why?" Dr. Lee asked, watching a group of miners hauling laser cutters toward defensive positions. "Why are you doing this for us?" An old miner named Jong overheard her. He paused in his work, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Ma'am, I've been working these rocks for 30 years. Never had kids of my own, never found someone to settle down with. But I know what kids mean to the people who love them." He looked at Min, who was making soft, cooing sounds. "That little one there, he's depending on us. Can't let him down." Over the next few hours, Han watched in amazement as the mining station transformed into a fortress. Industrial equipment became weapons. Cargo haulers turned into makeshift fighters. The miners worked with incredible efficiency, modifying systems and preparing defensive positions like they'd been planning for this battle their entire lives. "It's happening again," Dr. Lee whispered, running scans on the workers. "They're displaying tactical knowledge they shouldn't have, but this time it's different, stronger." Min was different too. The baby's metallic skin was beginning to glow, more brightly, pulsing with patterns that seemed to respond to the emotions of the people around him. When the miners looked at him with protective determination, his skin flared brighter. When they spoke about their families back home, the patterns shifted to warmer colors. He's responding to their love, Han realized, their willingness to sacrifice for him. The Vex arrived just after midnight, station time. Their ships emerged from hyperspace like black holes given form, surrounding the asteroid with overwhelming force. Chief Bayek's voice echoed through the station's corridors. "This is it, people. They want our baby. They're going to have to go through every one of us first." That's when Min began to change in ways Han had never seen before. The baby's glow became almost blinding, and the genetic patterns in his skin started moving faster, more complex. Dr. Lee's scanners were going crazy, detecting energy readings that shouldn't be possible. Han, His genetic repository is reaching some kind of critical mass, she said, her voice tight with excitement and fear. All those extinct civilizations, all that stored genetic memory, it's activating at once. Min looked up at Han with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than they should be. The baby reached out with tiny hands, and Han felt a warm sensation spread through his chest. Images flashed through his mind, memories that weren't his own, knowledge from species that had been dead for thousands of years. Around the station, the miners were experiencing the same thing. Their movements became more coordinated, their tactical decisions more brilliant. They weren't just fighting with human determination anymore. They were fighting with the combined experience and desperate hope of every extinct civilization that Min carried within him. The genetic repository isn't just storage, Dr. Lee breathed. It's a weapon, a way for all those dead species to fight back through human hands. As the first Vex assault pods began cutting through the station's outer hull, Han looked down at the glowing baby in his arms and realized they weren't just making a last stand. They were about to witness something the galaxy had never seen before, the resurrection of extinct civilizations through the love and sacrifice of humanity. The real battle was just beginning. The Vex assault began at 0300 hours, and within minutes, Han knew this wasn't like the other battles. The aliens weren't just attacking, they were dissecting the station piece by piece, cutting through hull plating with surgical precision. They wanted Min alive, and they were willing to carve through every human on the station to get him. Hull. Breach in Section 7, Chief Bayek's voice crackled over the comm. They're coming through the mining tunnels. Han pressed himself against the bulkhead in the station's central hub. Min clutched tight against his chest. The baby was glowing so brightly now that Han had to squint to look at him. The metallic patterns on Min's skin were moving like living, things swirling and pulsing with energy that made the air itself hum. Something's happening, Dr. Lee said, her scanner readings going wild. His genetic repository is reaching complete activation. I'm detecting DNA patterns from over 100 different species. That's when everything changed. Min's eyes suddenly blazed with light, and Han felt a shock of pure energy course through his body. But it wasn't painful. It was like being connected to something vast and ancient and furious. Images flooded his mind, memories that weren't his own, knowledge from civilizations that had fought and died long before humans ever looked up at the stars. Around the station, every human was experiencing the same thing. Engineer Choi, who had been trying to jury-rig the station's mining lasers into weapons, suddenly straightened up with a look of absolute certainty. His hands moved across the control panels with impossible speed and precision, building something that shouldn't exist. The mining equipment began transforming, reshaping itself into weapon systems that belonged to a species called the Vorthak, master engineers who had been extinct for 3,000 years. I know what to do, Choi whispered, his voice filled with wonder and rage. I remember how they built their sunbreakers. In the fighter bay, Pilot Song was strapping herself into a battered cargo hauler that had never been designed for combat. But as Min's light touched her mind, she suddenly knew things about flying that no human had ever learned. Her hands moved across the controls with the skill of ace pilots from a dozen different worlds, species that had ruled the space lanes before the Vex consumed them. I can see their attack patterns, she breathed. I know how they think. The Vex boarding parties that had been cutting through the station's defenses suddenly found themselves facing something impossible. Human miners were fighting with combat techniques from warrior races that had been legendary for their skill in battle. Security Chief Yoon moved through the corridors like a ghost, using stealth tactics perfected by the shadow hunters of Kelmar Prime. Dr. Lee's medical bay became a fortress of healing knowledge as she accessed the medical techniques of dozens of extinct healer species. I can treat wounds I've never seen before, she said in amazement. I know how to heal damage that would kill any human. But it was the fury that shocked Han the most. Through Min's connection, he could feel the accumulated rage of every civilization. The Vex had destroyed, the desperate love of parents who had died protecting their children, the grief of entire species facing extinction, the defiant courage of warriors making their last stand. And now all of that emotion, all of that knowledge, was flowing through human minds and hearts. They're not just predators, Han realized, watching the tactical displays as human forces. began pushing the Vex back. "They're thieves. They stole the lives of all these people, and now they're getting them back." The Vex, for the first time in their history, were facing something they couldn't understand. They had consumed hundreds of civilizations, absorbed their knowledge and abilities, but they had never faced all of them at once. Human ships were using tactics from extinct admirals. Human soldiers were fighting with techniques from warrior cultures that had been masters of combat. Human engineers were building weapons with technology that predated the Vex Empire itself. "Impossible," came the transmitted voice of a Vex commander, its usual cold confidence replaced by something like fear. "The consumed species are dead. Their knowledge belongs to us." But Min was proving them wrong. The baby's light was growing brighter with each passing moment, his genetic repository pouring the accumulated wisdom and rage of 100 extinct civilizations into every human in the system. The dead were fighting back through human hands, and they were winning. Station Chief Bayek's voice came over the comm, filled with grim satisfaction. "This is for every child you've murdered, every world you've destroyed. Today, the dead get their revenge." Han looked down at Min, who was watching the battle with those ancient, knowing eyes. The baby reached up with tiny hands and made a soft sound that somehow conveyed the message perfectly. "This is what I was made for. This is why I survived." The Vex had spent eons believing they were the ultimate predators, but they were about to learn that some things, once taken, never stop fighting to come home. The silence after the battle was almost harder to believe than the fighting itself. Han stood in the observation deck of mining station Tai Sung, Min sleeping peacefully in his arms, and watched the Vex fleet disappearing into hyperspace. The ships that had terrorized the galaxy for thousands of years were running away like frightened animals. "I can't believe it," Dr. Lee whispered, staring at her scanner readings. "They're actually retreating. The entire fleet is jumping to hyperspace." Chief Bayek's voice came over the station's comm system, tired but triumphant. "All stations, this is the Chief. The Vex are gone. I repeat, the hostiles have withdrawn from the system." A cheer went up from the miners and crew throughout the station, but Han felt something deeper than victory. Through the connection Min had created, he could still sense the echoes of those extinct civilizations. They weren't gone anymore. They were part of humanity now, their knowledge and memories preserved in human minds and hearts. "What happens now?" Han asked, looking down at Min. The baby's glow had faded to a soft, warm light, and those dark eyes were looking up at him with something that might have been gratitude. "Now we find out what Min really is," Dr. Lee said, running gentle scans on the sleeping child. "His genetic repository has stabilized, but it's not dormant anymore. He's become something new, a living bridge between the extinct and the living. Over." The next few days, as word of the victory spread through human space, Han began to understand the true scope of what had happened. The humans who had been touched by Min's power weren't losing their new abilities. Engineer Choi was already working on designs for ships that combined human technology with the advanced sciences of extinct civilizations. Pilot Song was teaching other pilots flying techniques that belonged to legendary ace squadrons from species that had been dead for millennia. "It's not just knowledge," Dr. Lee explained as they prepared to leave the station. "It's like Min has made humanity the inheritors of every civilization the Vex destroyed. We're not just remembering their techniques, we're carrying on their cultures, their hopes, their dreams." The most amazing part was how naturally humans were adapting to their new role. Colonies across human space were establishing memorial gardens for extinct species, creating art that honored lost civilizations, writing music that captured the songs of dead worlds. Children were learning languages that hadn't been spoken in thousands of years, not because they had to, but because they wanted to keep those voices alive. "We're not conquering anyone," Han realized as they traveled from world to world, watching humanity embrace its new responsibility. "We're adopting them just like we adopted Min." The baby was growing fast, developing abilities that amazed everyone who met him. He could communicate with humans telepathically now, sharing memories and emotions from the extinct civilizations he carried. But more than that, he was teaching humanity to be guardians of the galaxy's lost heritage. Captain Park, who had led the first response to Han's emergency broadcast, summed it up perfectly during a meeting on New Sol Colony. "We didn't just save one child," he said, watching Min play with a group of human children who were learning games from extinct species. "We saved the memory of 100 civilizations. And they're not extinct anymore. They're part of us now." The Vex never returned to human space. Intelligence reports suggested they were in complete disarray, their leadership unable to comprehend what had happened. For the first time in their history, they had encountered something they couldn't consume, couldn't understand, couldn't defeat. Humanity's chaotic protective love had proven stronger than their cold, calculated hunger. Han often thought about that dying warrior woman who had pressed Min into his arms with her last breath. She had asked him to take her child somewhere, safe, somewhere the hunters couldn't follow. But she had given humanity something much more precious than one baby. She had given them the chance to become something greater than they had ever imagined. "You know what I think," Han said one evening, watching Min toddle around their quarters on steady legs, babbling in a mixture of human words and extinct alien languages. "I think she knew exactly what would happen. She knew that humans would never abandon a child, no matter what the cost." Dr. Lee, who had become like a grandmother to Min, smiled as she watched the boy stack blocks in patterns that contained mathematical principles from advanced civilizations. "Maybe that's what makes us human. We're not the strongest species in the galaxy, or the smartest or the most advanced, but we're the ones who show up when someone needs help." Min looked up at them and smiled, his metallic skin shimmering with patterns that told the story of 100 worlds. In his eyes, Han could see the gratitude of every extinct civilization, every lost culture, every parent who had died protecting their children. They weren't gone anymore. They had found new life in the most unlikely guardians, a species that had never learned to give up on their kids, even when those kids belonged to someone else. The galaxy was safe, not because humanity was the strongest, but because they were the species that never stopped caring. And that, Han realized, was the most powerful force in the universe.